I want to thank everybody for tuning in to the inaugural episode of Beyond Explanation. I am Brandon, sometimes referred to as B, and I got my buddy here, Solus. And we are two buds who kind of have UFO discussions from time to time and decided to take it into the YouTube realm because it seems like a lot of people are doing that, and we thought, why not us?
Indeed.
So we thought it would be a good place to start with the first episode of Unidentified that's been airing on the History Channel. That's about the 2004 encounter that was with the aircraft carrier Nimitz and the USS Princeton. And it was a pretty good episode, at least to start off. It's pretty informational heavy. So if you've dealt with like the 30-minute Nimitz encounter YouTube video that a lot of people have seen, it's going to be some repeated information for sure. I know for Solus and I, we've been kind of following this in our personal lives for quite some time because it's a bit of an oddball story. You're already starting off with something like unidentified aerial phenomenon, and then you're going to add in the likes of Blink 182, Tom DeLonge, and a lot of government officials that seemingly have real ranks who have retired to go work with a former rock star.
Yeah, we've both been chasing this story for a few years now, and while there's not a whole lot new in Unidentified, there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it would be safe to say that you and I have had a lot of healthy skepticism when it's come to this kind of whole situation. And while you and I find a lot of these things fascinating, especially things that you just can't explain, hence the title of the show,
Mm-hmm.
we always approach it with a I don't know sort of attitude. And with this especially, there's certain things that I feel like you can't deny because of the fact of how many aspects in which they approach it. But it's also, there are aspects of this that you can't look away from where you're like, man, it's like an itch on the back of your neck. And you're like, I just can't get to it to make this satisfying. And so that I'll leave it at that for right now because we're going to get into that a little bit more later with our actual full thoughts and opinions. We're going to kind of briefly recap the episode just to make sure that if you saw it or you didn't, you kind of have an idea as to what's going on. We're not going to get super duper in depth. We may get some names and places wrong to some extent. We're not news broadcasters or journalists.
Pronunciations,
Yeah,
etc.
yeah, we're not a news outlet. We're just here to have a good time, chat about something that we find interesting. And if anybody has any thoughts or comments or feelings, please feel free to leave those below. Crush the like button when you have a second, subscribe. That helps us out tremendously. We're just getting started, but we plan on bringing everybody some super awesome content in the future for sure. So, again, Unidentified Episode 1 takes place on the History Channel. It's been airing on the last couple Fridays. We are a couple episodes in already, so we're a little late on getting started with this, but we're going to wrap them up pretty quickly, I think.
Yeah, I believe it aired on May 31st.
Yeah, there you go. So everything kind of starts off with just them talking about the bare bones of the incident, if you will. So
Mm-hmm.
November of 2004, there's a training exercise. Two Super Hornets take off from an aircraft carrier, the Nimitz. They're about 30 miles off of the coast of California, and they
South
were
of the U.S.-Mexico border.
yeah. So they are going through basic training maneuvers, things of that nature. And after some exercises, they basically get told, hey, we have like a real world situation that we want you to take a look at. So they give them a point to go check out and basically say, hey, can you go over here and just see what you see and let us know if you see anything that's kind of out of place, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So they take off, they go over. Initially, they mentioned that they thought it might be like drug runners or something like that, and they were going to have some fun busting some people.
Yeah, while they were on the way, and then they said when they approached it, it looked like possibly an airplane crash. Or
Yeah.
craft on the water.
So as they get closer to the point and they get to the point where they were told to look, initially they don't really see too much other than like a bubbling from under the surface of like the water. And the one female pilot that they don't identify had said that that's what she had initially thought, that it might be a downed aircraft or something of that nature, because it was just below the surface of the water, and with it kind of dispersing the top of the surface of the water, it kind of looked like when a ship's going down and then the air pocket kind of goes along with it.
Yep.
So the as they are circling the point in the water, he mentions kind of going around in a clockwise motion, and so as they get around to 6 and to 9 o'clock, this little kind of well, not little, it's about this 40-foot white object that they see without any flight surfaces or wings or any discernible real details that would make you feel like it's a aircraft.
Both Navy pilots keep referring to it as a giant tic-tac.
Yes. So like the candies.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why in my mind when I heard tic-tac 8 million times, I think of the game. I don't think of the candy.
Gotcha.
And so
I was thinking the candy.
Yeah.
Breath mint, if you will.
Yeah, exactly, like the breath mint. So they see this, it's a 40-foot large tic-tac candy, if you will, that is kind of above this displaced water, and it's flying, hovering. And then as they moved around from the 6 to 9 o'clock is when they noticed that they had, like, they noticed the tic-tac noticed them, if you will.
It started to respond to them.
Yeah, and so it started to match their altitude and their speed, and they were a bit startled because they thought, well, I don't really know what this is. It clearly is very fast.
Faster and more maneuverable than we are, and what else does it have?
And they had
it's coming right for us.
Exactly, and they were on a training exercise, so they had absolutely no weapons of any kind on the airplanes that they were flying. So yes, they're state of the art in terms of how fast they can go and the maneuvers they can pull, but they don't have any payload in that instance to take care of something if things go down.
They mentioned that back on the USS Princeton, the radio chatter got very frantic at that time.
Yeah.
I can only imagine.
What the bleep is that? Things of that nature.
Yes.
So they also made note of the fact that it was the middle of the day, blue skies, not a cloud in the sky. There was nothing obstructing their view of this particular event. So it wasn't, in their opinion, it wasn't a weather phenomenon. It was something that they were able to see quite clearly.
Yes, and even the footage you can see pretty clearly, and the footage is legitimate Department of Defense Navy pilot footage.
Yeah, and supposedly, from what I understand, they have a clearer image of everything, but it hasn't ever been released. So as they're making their circle around the object, they get from 6 to 9 and start to head towards 12 o'clock. And as they get towards 12 o'clock, the object is basically mirroring them on the actual circle now. And as they hit to 12 o'clock, it makes a drastic turn and it just takes off.
Yeah, it started climbing aggressively to their altitude, started mimicking them, and then just went right in front of that one pilot, right? So it just breezed by them and gone.
And in a matter of seconds, they estimated at over 3,000 miles an hour.
Yeah, 3,700 miles per hour.
Yeah,
It resurfaced, it disappeared and then resurfaced 60 miles away in under a minute.
Yeah, so it poof, is gone. So after it left, they tell the pilots, like, hey, we have this point, like a rendezvous point set up for you. We want you to, cap point. We want you to go there, check it out. Just, we'll meet up there essentially. And then as they're on their way there, they get a radio call that's like, hey, so this is kind of odd, but that thing you saw, it's at the cap point. It's at your rendezvous point. So how did it know where to go? This is 60 miles from where they initially saw this unidentified flying phenomenon. And just so you know, that's kind of the new lingo that they're using now. It's not really UFO anymore these days. It's UAP, unidentified flying phenomenon. I think they're trying to, phenomenon. I think they're trying to distance themselves from, things that happened in the past so that they can start to slowly talk about these things, but not have the stigma attached to it that certain words and phrases do from before. So this was one of the parts that Solus and I were a little confused about because the episode doesn't really say about what happens when they got to the rendezvous point. They basically talk about, they said that the craft was there, the tic-tac, and then they went back to the carrier essentially to like talk about what happened, or because I guess maybe their shift was over.
Well, yeah, I think they called him back at some point, and then when they got back, um, they said that everybody took him very seriously, and
Initially,
one guy said, "I'm gonna go find this thing," and then they dropped it.
so the next shift of guys that went out had an infrared camera on their plane and or jet, whatever you want to call it. And so when the one of the guys was very motivated to try to find what this was, and so they went out there to try to take pictures of it and video, and they did end up getting video of it, which ends up being what is released now from the Department of Defense through this Lou Elizondo video. Lou Elizondo, like basically this whole thing is from the Stars Academy, and that's kind of what we first started talking about in the beginning, which is this group, like super group of guys who have been brought together to essentially bring us disclosure, I think, in so many words. And
Yeah, actually, they were all involved in the Pentagon's program, the AATIP, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification. It started in 2007. It was first made public in December of 2017, but it had already disbanded at that point and lost funding in 2012. But the former members, plus Tom DeLonge, started the Stars Academy.
and that's Tom DeLonge is an executive producer on the show.
Yes.
So from all that we can tell, this whole thing is like there in the History Channel's baby. Like, and when this kind of all started, not to get on a segue here, but they had talked about with to the Stars Academy that they were going to be doing things like making entertainment, that they were going to be bringing out like movies and TV shows and things to make the idea of disclosure a more normal thing, like a more everyday idea.
Yes. And to get funding for their projects and mission.
Yes, and we'll get into a little bit more about that in a little bit. So the show kind of continues on after that. The second crew went out. They got the video. They came back. They had reviewed it a bit, and that's all they really got into at that moment. So after that, they came back and talked about that they brought in a guy who was a retired Top Gun pilot and a commercial airline pilot, and they were showing them the video from the Nimitz that they got off the jet from the infrared camera.
Which is very easy to find if you look up the USS Nimitz encounter, Navy plane UFO footage. It's easy to find.
If you just type Nimitz encounter into YouTube, right now it's coming up as like one of the top 2 videos that you'll find. It's around 30 minutes long. The documentary they did is free that you can find online.
It's so hot right now.
Yeah. So if you don't have cable and you don't have the History Channel, then you can go there and at least watch an approximation, a much more succinct version of this. It doesn't have every single little detail associated with it, but it's really well put together for what it is. I enjoyed it.
The video is very much worth watching. It is legitimate Department of Defense footage, and it was originally released, I think, by the New York Times, broke the story in 2017. So we're going on about 2 years since this broke, and
yeah, they definitely did an article on the front page of the New York Times about it. So they were showing the Top Gun pilot and the commercial airline pilot the footage, and so they basically talk about how they're assessing it for if they've ever seen anything like it in the past in their experience, because clearly these guys are trained observers. They've had time in the sky where they're used to looking at these different machines and panels and whatnot. And they basically talked about, everything we've set up to this point. It had no flight surfaces. They kind of went into how when you look at a jet through an infrared camera, you would see the form of propulsion that they have, because there's so much heat associated with that thrust, with that movement. And this
no
wasn't.
heat generated, no exhaust.
Yeah, with the tic-tac, they didn't see any heat, any exhaust, any flight surfaces, anything at all that would categorize it as a normal type of aircraft.
Luckily, tic-tac isn't very threatening.
Yeah, this is a minty encounter, if nonetheless.
I believe Elizondo quantified them as observables that they're looking for. This thing had instant acceleration, anti-gravity properties, and again, no heat, no combustion engine, nothing that we've seen before to keep this thing off the ground or the water. It had hypersonic velocity, which kind of seems like instant acceleration to me, but
yeah, it moved
sounds
fast.
Cool. Yeah. Low observability, and possibly the ability to bend space and time.
And that's kind of one of the interesting arguments to this. And I don't want to go down a super long segue right this minute, because I want to keep it towards this episode for the most part. But we've talked before about with Bob Lazar and him talking about them trying to essentially reverse engineer an alien spacecraft or some kind of UFO rather, and that it kind of is able to bend energy around things and things of that nature to cause propulsion. So it's interesting because like you don't really know if it's like energy or force that's causing it to go, or if they're bending time around something, or like there's so many different routes that this could go that just it's crazy.
Both require immense amount of energy.
Yeah.
And we don't, to my knowledge, have that at this time on planet Earth, which is pretty crazy. And if they do, that if somebody on Earth does, that's kind of scary as well. And that's something that these guys are supposedly chasing. If it's not UFOs, it's phenomenon.
Yeah, unidentified aerial phenomenon. Yeah.
Then this also needs to be looked into by the U.S. government because we are losing the technology race somewhere.
They kind of beat you over the head with that point through the episode, but yeah, definitely. And then they kind of start going into those guys basically say everything that we already knew up to this point, as far as no flight surfaces. It goes super fast. Not anything like we've normally seen before.
No wings, no rotors, no windows.
Yep, none. Oh, and the maneuver it pulled with the pilot, where it made that drastic turn and then went the 60 miles in like no time at all, where it went over 3,000 miles an hour. They said if a person was in that, it would crush you.
The G-force would kill you.
Yeah. So there's not any way that they believe that a normal person could be in there because you couldn't handle it. So they basically go through a little bit more of introducing to the Stars Academy. We talked a little bit about Lou Elizondo, who was the head of the ATIP program for, was it 20 years, right? And then he ended up retiring because he felt like he really needed to bring this disclosure, if you will, to get people to take it seriously and bring it to the masses as well as the government, and try to get people to actually, for once, listen to him.
Yeah.
They talk a little bit about Chris Mellon, who was a guy from a schwanky family, who also worked at the Pentagon for a long time and now works with To the Stars Academy.
He got interested in the subject when he was there at Area 51 and started asking questions, and people said they'd seen a lot of interesting things there.
And as an aside, like, I love how he just casually mentioned, like, yeah, I was at Area 51, and I was like, hey, did you guys ever see anything weird? And they were like, yeah, man, we've seen some stuff. And, like, that's what, I'm like, really? That's all it took was for you to be in a random place? And why were you even there? Like, you just happened upon, like, you and I couldn't just stroll up to Area 51.
Because he's Christopher fucking Mellon.
Yeah. And I don't know why, that just kind of, like, to me, struck me as being funny, because I'm like, that's all it took was some guys were like, yeah, I saw some shit, and he's like, oh yeah, these guys are onto something.
Yeah. He just glossed over it, just left it out there and didn't elaborate.
So then the episode basically talks about Project Blue Book, which was a government funded program or study that was looking into UFOs or unidentified aerial phenomenon. that took place. Phenomena. It took place from 1952 to 1969. Ultimately, they concluded that they didn't know what it was, these phenomenon. Sorry. But they said that they definitely didn't think that it was a threat.
Yes, there was. It was a pretty high number, maybe like 50,000 reports, and they determined 700 of them to be unexplainable, but not a threat.
Yeah. We don't know what it is, but it's not going to kill you. So, so then I basically talk about how Lou Elizondo was apparently at one point traveling across the country, and he gets a phone call, and they had a funny reenactment that we were kind of busting on a little bit, where he gets a call from the commander, who was the guy who flew the jet that saw the tic-tac initially.
Commander Dave Fravor?
Yeah, Fravor, or something of that nature. So the guy apparently got a meeting with members of Congress, U.S. senators, not on the books. The press wasn't informed about it.
They wish to remain anonymous.
Yeah, but he got a meeting with them where he went there and basically told them his story. Mm-hmm. A lot of basically what we've talked about up to this point, that they were on a training exercise, they got there, they saw this, they didn't know what it was.
It was the two pilots that encountered it. It was the woman that wanted to remain anonymous in the episode, and Dave Fravor.
It was definitely interesting because they talk about it at the end of the little conversation reenactment thing that he has, where he's like, "Oh man, you've made history, my friend," and it's the first time that U.S. senators have been briefed on unidentified aerial phenomenon. And you had made the comment like, "How would he know that?" And I said, "Well, because this has already happened." But it is a valid point, I feel like, though, because yes, this guy took part in this program for 20 years. So you're going to say that for 20 years there was never any point in time that he got to brief a single senator on any unidentified aerial phenomenon?
Yeah. He doesn't really go into details about any walls that he ran into or anything like that. And he kind of painted it as he left the Department of Defense being patriotic and not wanting to disrespect his country. But his motives are slightly suspect to me.
All of the guys, and we're going to get into thoughts in a second, but all of the guys that they show seem to me to not dislike being on camera.
Indeed, they really like the attention, it seemed, except for that one Navy pilot seemed scared shitless. The woman Navy officer,
the lady
that wanted to remain anonymous, still works for the government apparently. So she definitely lends credibility, but was also in a shadow. So
yeah. So they kind of lead you to believe at this point in the episode that the government's maybe taking this a little bit more seriously. They're at least willing to meet, but it still seems a bit suspect that this would really be the first time that this ever happened. Maybe with this specific commander, but I highly doubt that that's the first time they've ever been briefed as a whole in the history of the U.S. government about UFOs.
Yes, it seems really silly to me, especially considering that you have to go to these people for budget concerns for these kind of things and whatnot if you're working through the Department of Defense and the Pentagon. How have they never been briefed on any of this? And there's the black budget. I know that gets obscured. I don't know who gets to see that, but it still needs to be approved by Congress. So I imagine at least a handful of them know what's going on.
I've definitely heard things about it in my times of going through finding out as much as I can about UFOs and things of that nature.
It's something that's gained some traction right now
because
they're bringing it up. And currently I think we're spending over $50 billion a year budgeted toward that black budget that is not identified at all or earmarked for anything in particular.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting to know that we certainly don't know where all that money's going that we give for taxes and things of that nature, for sure. And I don't So recently I was watching, I don't know if everyone knows, if you're ever looking for a source, at least recently I've been watching Richard Dolan on YouTube.
Okay.
And he and his wife will have these nice little shows that they'll do where they'll talk about disclosure and things of that nature. And they were recently talking about, I guess there was a leak very much about that type of black ops sort of deal where somebody who was looking into how that money was spent was going through and finding these programs where they had no supervision.
Ah.
And it's interesting. I don't want to get into it a whole lot right now. Maybe that'll be another episode. But if you're interested in that, you can check it out. Again, if you just go on YouTube and look up Richard Dolan, it'll come up.
Okay.
But yeah, so basically through the episode, they talk about the different members. They talked about Project Blue Book. And then after they kind of went through and talked about the secret Congress briefing, they just kind of went through talking about, I don't want to necessarily call it fear mongering at that point, but it was just a lot of like, look, we don't know what this is. If this is something bad, we're essentially screwed. And I don't know in that, like, I get that they're trying to get people to take it seriously, but I don't necessarily think that you need to do that in that necessarily. Like, the facts speak for themselves.
It makes people turn over their money faster.
Yeah, that's true. So, I mean, this is a for-profit business. To the Stars Academy is for-profit.
100%.
So, yeah, I mean, that is a valid point for sure. If a little bit of fear-mongering might go a long way when it comes to your pocketbook.
Yeah, they're big on their investment model and such.
So they emphasize towards the end that essentially that disclosure has begun. That we have now finally started to get videos from the Department of Defense where they're talking about like unidentified aerial phenomena. They're not saying aliens by any means. They're not saying that, but we don't know what this is. And so I think that even is a pretty big step. Like, I mean, I'm in my early 30s. You're in your mid to early 30s.
Late 30s.
Well, I was trying to be generous.
Thank you.
And so I mean, it's something in my lifetime I never really thought we would start to see. And I know, especially growing up, it was never something that I thought would be seriously talked about.
And if you told me that it was going to come out of the mouth of Tom DeLonge, I would have been even more shocked.
Right? Yeah, definitely. One cool thing to mention about towards the end of the episode is they did bring up, they had George Knapp come up, and he was just bringing up a little bit about we don't know what this is, but these are definite things that we need to find out more about. George Knapp is the radio host of Coast to Coast AM. You may know him from that, and Art Bell, and a lot of different guys who were on there.
Art Bell was the original.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. And it's kind of like this show, and it's kind of like what, to me, got me a lot of interest in these types of topics, because I feel like hard, especially as in earlier years, for people to talk about this stuff just so openly. Like,
Without being mocked.
Yeah, and George Knapp talks about, I mean, if you go and follow the history, he was like a normal news guy that you would find, like the 6 ABC news host dude. And then now, after running into Bob Lazar, he is now essentially gone off on this tangent of UFO and unexplainable things. And the shows are awesome. His voice is great. If you're a person that enjoys this topic at all and you just like to hear people who are smooth talkers on the subject, the guy's great. And I don't mean like smooth talker as in like he's selling you a tale, but I mean in like he just has good chops when it comes to vocals.
Gotcha.
But it basically ends with Lou at a conference, the show, and just basically saying that he believes this has already started. Disclosure has begun, and they're already here, is the words that they basically end on. So it's a show that I feel like is a lot like most history shows that you'll see. I think you and I have both probably watched Ancient Aliens before.
History or History Channel shows?
History Channel shows.
Yes, yeah.
That yet you'll see. the production value was good.
Mm-hmm.
There was never really a time, even though this was like super factual heavy and a lot of like, uh, I don't want to say like braggadocious like stuff, but like trying to say who these guys are and what their chops are and why they're actually involved in this. But to me, that almost lends a little bit to the this is almost too good to be true sort of deal. Like, why like, and I talked to you about this before because I said it was kind of funny because you and I have talked at length about the motivations that might be behind this.
Mm-hmm.
So one motivation that we've talked about is clearly money,
Right.
and we mentioned that a little bit earlier because this is a fascinating subject to a lot of people, and a lot of people are willing to throw money down the table when it comes to being involved in these things. Like essentially, they even have UFO cons now,
Mm-hmm.
where you can go and listen to these people talk. They had one recently, Contact in the Desert, and you would pay a fee to go. Like I think it was over $200, and then you would have to pay an additional fee to hear certain people talk.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I mean, and I get it. This guy's got to make their money. Graham Hancock was there. There was some others.
Yeah, that's the thing. Those fringe authors, scientists, etc. They don't necessarily get funding, so it has to be privately funded. So I get that a little bit, and disclosure is interesting, but yeah, you definitely have to question some people's motives. And then I went into this watching this episode not knowing that Tom DeLonge produced it, and then had that question and looked it up afterwards, and sure enough, he's an executive producer on the show. So it's kind of odd to me that you have History Channel presenting this show about To the Stars Academy, and the people involved with that produced by someone from To the Stars Academy. So definitely,
like, let me tell you how awesome I am.
yeah, and just it's a journalist covering their own news story.
Yeah, kinda.
It's a little bit of a conflict of interest. You're only getting one side.
I feel like some people are definitely going to have a problem with the fact that it's for profit because they feel like people should be selfless in this, that like I'm not going to gain anything from trying to give people what they should already know.
Yeah. So you have people like Elon Musk, Robert Bigelow, who are putting their own money into these projects and doing things without begging the public for money.
Billionaires.
Yes, and the To the Stars Academy launched their brand, academy, if you will, to get people to invest. And it makes you wonder.
And they're not shy about that
money's
either.
going. No, they're not. No, it was, they mentioned it, and it was a spiel. It was a sales pitch there.
The whole first time that To the Stars came out, it was just the guy. It was Tom and a lot of the guys standing there on a stage, and it's what it was. It was like hey, we need money, funds to essentially do this, and this is what we plan to do with it. So like, hey, you can invest in this academy, and that was I think what really kind of took us aback at first.
Definitely.
And so if it's not the money aspect of things, then is there any other motivations that you can think of that it might be?
Gaining the spotlight, staying in the spotlight.
Yeah.
We'd all forgotten a little bit about Tom DeLonge for a few years.
But I mean, he could always re-pick back up the mantle. I mean, he could kick the guy from Alkaline Trio out and retake back the spotlight. I'm sure Travis and Mark would take him back.
Well, when To the Stars first put out their sales pitch, I'm going to call it, I believe I shared a video with you that had a guy explaining why Tom DeLonge was in this and what led him to this point financially, and it seemed like it was risky ventures in music. And he started a record label that failed, and he owed money to these people. And now, one of the most recent updates on To the Stars Academy was an article that was reported in 2018 saying they're $37 million in debt.
Yeah, I think that was consequenceofsound.net. And it was in 2018. and it said that To the Stars Academy was $37 million in debt.
Yeah, and the one thing that person that we saw trying to explain this whole thing was basically a paper trail of his different Tom DeLonge's different companies that failed, and then he rebranded but carried over the debt. So it seems like To the Stars already is starting in the red or is meant to get him out of the red.
Yeah, and we tried to find the video because it had been a while since we watched it, but we were having a hard time. We're not going to stop. I'm going to keep trying to find it again because it had been a while since we watched it. But essentially, it was a guy who was a real big UFO researcher who had a lot invested as far as emotionally in this topic. And then when Tom started doing this, he was like, there has to be some underlying motivations here for him to want to do this. And so he was basically saying that there are some money troubles that he had supposedly allegedly gone through in his life, and that might have led him down this road. The other is, I know it was mentioned that this might be like a government op sort of deal, like either in terms of distraction or in terms of like government controlled disclosure. And I talked to you a little bit about it because I don't understand how all these people who used to work for the government, who I can't imagine didn't sign NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, are now able to come forward and talk about this unless the government gave them the okay to say, okay, on this specific subject, this is what you're allowed to talk about, and this is what you can go into detail of, and this is what you can and can't say about it.
Even with an NDA, that doesn't guarantee that somebody's going to be quiet. You can sue them or go after them for some things, but I find it really hard to believe that if this was a government op that you could keep that many people quiet. That's always my problem with the conspiracy. If there's an idea that a small group of people are controlling something, I'm really impressed with the secret that those people can keep.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I think that's one of the more valid arguments when it comes to these things is just the litany of people that would have to be quiet for such a thing to occur. And I don't trust most people, to have that type of morality in that situation, or we'll say loyalty rather. So, this is our first episode into this particular topic. Again, crush that like button if you've enjoyed what you've heard. I mean, if you're still around at this point, I'm sure you did. Make sure you subscribe. Beyond Explanation is going to be the name of the show for now. So I'm curious, Solus, did you enjoy the first episode? Do you feel like it's starting to do enough to peel back the layers in that you can start to feel like these things are more legitimate? Or do you still feel like that impending boogeyman behind the wall of this is just another way that they're trying to pull the wool over my eyes?
If I'm being 100% honest, it reeks of bullshit to me. I see this as they were maybe lucky enough to get this footage, which is extremely extraordinary and is pretty valid and fascinating, but I don't like the way they're spinning it. I don't like that, just the way it's presented. It feels like a money grab to me.
It is awful polished, And like I said, most of the people who seem to be involved are very comfortable in front of the camera. Because you're like, how many UFO videos or these types of things have you watched? And the person has no personality. They look like they're crawling out of their own skin, and you're like, okay, so clearly this dude saw some stuff. There something happened to make you uneased, right. Where with these guys, for especially the commander, and that's because I was telling you, I've watched a few interviews with this guy now since this has all started to come out. You can find one with him and George Knapp and Jeremy Corbell on YouTube. It's just him and those two guys, and they're on a stage, and they're basically talking about this whole event. And you can tell the guy likes to work a room. He's telling jokes about things. He's doing these funny asides. like, okay, if I've told a story a bunch of times, I'm going to get better at telling that story.
Right.
I get that. That part I understand. And yes, we all want to be entertainers to an extent. Like, we all want to make sure that when someone is in front of us, if we're in front of a crowd, that we are pleasing. Nobody wants to be a dick.
Right, but like you said, generally those people, the people that encounters happen to and whatnot, are not people who are used to being in the spotlight. This guy had a grin on his face every time I saw him, and he was enjoying telling the story. And some people are just good at telling stories. Is he a commander that saw some shit and is really good at telling the story, or is he really good at telling stories?
Yeah, and I think that's the main thing that you get with all of this. And it's, as much as I find all of these things so immensely fascinating, there's only so far down the road that I'm mentally prepared to go as far as how much I'll actually put emotional investment in it.
Right. I it's really intriguing to me, and I'm curious where it's going. And I think I speak for a lot of people when I say that we want disclosure. We want these things explained. If you go and watch the video, you're gonna have a lot of questions, and you're gonna want those questions answered. I don't know if I want that question answered by Tom DeLonge.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a fair thing to say. And, you know, I think it's an interesting topic. I won't necessarily say that I want aliens to be real, because I feel like there is a lot of unknown things with that. And to me, I'm the type of person that, like, facts make me comfortable. So
Yeah.
if there's this unknown thing out there, there's going to be a lot that I have to peel back about that, and it would take me a while to be okay with it, I feel like. But, like, to me, it's still so intriguing because there's so many things out there that, to me, there's so much space that it's almost ignorant to feel like that it's just us, you know? And that's how I've always kind of felt like with it.
Yes. I'm more than willing to believe in aliens and even the technology and such.
But I'm not going to be led by the nose in the same aspect either.
Yeah.
And that's why I say, like, the stuff I do find fascinating, but I always do try to approach it from a skeptical point of view in that instance. And I know most people try to say that. But that's why, to me, this whole thing has been fascinating, and I think was so apropos for us to start on this specific subject with this show, because you and I have both looked into this specific thing with To the Stars Academy so much, because it's like, I want this. This seems crazy enough to be legitimate, and it seems like it's complete bullshit at the same time.
I want to believe, and I want to watch the train wreck.
Yeah.
Both parts.
Exactly. So, like, I if it's real, I want to be there. If it's not, I want to watch it unfold and just crash and burn.
And I just want to laugh.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like I said, the really intriguing thing to me is that like Robert Bigelow is never mentioned in this, and this is a man who has dedicated a lot of time and research to it. He had the National Institute for Discovery Science that he started in 1995. Disbanded in 2004. They did a lot of fringe science research, and you have a legitimate company in Bigelow Aerospace who has put Genesis 1 and 2 into space. The beam module, which is attached to the ISS, the International Space Station, and that was launched in April 8th, 2016, carried by SpaceX, Elon Musk. Now, the other problem I have is To the Stars Academy in around 2016 promised us that this was going to lead to technology advancements.
Yes.
And that was one of their missions. And so far, I've only seen a History Channel documentary on themselves, while these other guys are putting shit into space and figuring out that technology.
Yes. And not to go too far down a rabbit hole, but it's almost like Bob Lazar with, was it Element 151, has done more on that since the 80s than these guys have done. And they're like touting that they're going to do this. And I think that, I mean, that's a really good point, and we didn't mention that earlier. My apologies there, but they are talking about not only doing like TV shows and movies and different ventures in entertainment, but also doing things in science and technology, that they're like reverse engineering things,
Correct.
and things of that nature, bringing about different unknown elements, and things. And that's what I wanted to mention a little bit with Robert Bigelow. And again, this is an endless rabbit hole. So you have to forgive the segues, folks. We're gonna bounce around on this like crazy. So
It's
we're
really
trying.
hard not to.
Yeah, we're trying. So Robert Bigelow, if I remember correctly, isn't he the guy that supposedly has a warehouse in Las Vegas somewhere with these unknown materials inside that we don't really know if they're real or if he actually has them, but he says he does. They're starting to talk about doing actual vacation travel to space. Like you can go up to the International Space Station, right?
I think so. Yeah.
Or something of that approximation, but essentially space vacations.
Yeah, for private citizens.
Yeah, millions of dollars I'm sure it will cost for you to do this.
Not
But
in my lifetime.
yeah,
Not for me in my lifetime.
but if you got the loot, you can go up there and see what it's like. So I think in closing, one of the things that I really wanted to say was just I thought it would be cool for us to kind of get on record, and we kind of did already to a small extent, but just to kind of enwrap, how we feel in today's climate. It's 2019. We are finally having these supposed disclosures starting to happen where these things are talked about. You got Trump talking about Space Force, different things that are going on. Do you feel like that this is something that we're going to have happen, that in our lifetimes we'll be able to see, hey man, UFOs are real? And I think that's the part that I'll get to that, and I'll do that aside later. That's my thoughts. Sorry. What do you feel in that particular situation? Do you feel like that's something that's going to happen?
I don't know. It seems like fringe science and paranormal stuff is gaining attention and momentum right now. But you also have to consider that this is the age of cell phones, and I don't think there's any more UFO sightings or phenomenon
Dun, 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 dun.
than 30 years ago. So,
Yeah.
I mean, there's definitely been spikes, and it's typically around wartime and such that these things start happening. You know, the Cold War was when a lot of this started, and, there's a lot of technology that's scary to people right now. So, is it a boogeyman that people are looking at? I mean, one thing that you can say about the Nimitz encounter is it could be drones that we don't know exist yet.
Be some badass drones.
Right?
Because they would have to, they'd have to fly over 3,000 miles an hour, and we definitely don't have anything like that right now. Yeah, I feel like for myself, I feel like we may actually, much like they have now, might have a more real version of them saying, hey, there's legitimately things that we can't explain. I don't think we're going to have specifically like aliens are real.
Yes. That's where I lie is I love diving into unexplained phenomenon and want to see it explained. I'm not sure that it's gray men living in Area 51 giving us technology, and like to the Stars Academy, as much as they're rebranding it, it still seems like it just is the same kind of schmear as like Area 51. It's a tourist trap, but on the internet.
Yeah, and well, I definitely think that people should check out the show if you're at all interested in the topic, because again, these are videos of unexplained things. We're not, they're not saying it's aliens, but these are things that we have no idea what this is.
And I bring the skepticism, but I'm still watching with bated breath.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's the main thing. I feel like there are aspects of this that are true, in that yes, this video exists and these are things that happened, but it's always hard to believe the narrative that's given to you so openly is really what's truly all known. Like, are we even getting all the information on this? Or is this something that's like, hey, we know about this and we need to start getting out in front of it. So let's do some more innocuous things about this so that they'll think one thing when in reality it's something else.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, feel like if they were trying to get out in front of something that was a threat to us, they would be having more meetings with people in Congress and not making History Channel documentaries
Yeah,
that
that's
air
true.
after ancient aliens. But
Yep.
that's just me.
Yeah. And Ancient Aliens can be fun too. I think that show is a lot of BS, but it's some of it
I've
is
watched
totally
them all.
fun. Yeah.
It's a fun story time.
Yeah, and I think if nothing else, it gives you that. I mean, this has been a fun thing for us to kind of delve into as far as this encounter that happened in 2004.
Hmm.
Whenever you're dealing with something where you have people who are supposed to be highly educated individuals seeing something that they don't understand, I think that's always a fun game to play of, hey, what could that really be?
Yeah, yeah. I love the discussions and just the thinking involved with trying to figure that out. That's why it's also hard to knock the To the Stars Academy, and why, like I said, people like me are like, yes, I want to see it, but I'm gonna be here to watch you fail.
Yeah, and that's the thing is like I will gladly eat my words if I'm wrong.
Ditto.
I will be very happy to say, hey man, thank you for doing this because you would deserve such gratitude if this is something that their actual intentions are legitimate.
Agreed.
But I have a hard time feeling like that's the case.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I feel like that's a good spot to end it. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Anyone, I think this is going to be a fun passion project for us. We're going to start trying to do this as weekly as possible.
Hmm.
So we're going to start doing the other episodes of Unidentified next. I think we're going to try to shoot for next week, hopefully, or the week after. We have some different things coming up with Warp Tour and some other fun things that we have planned. We're talking about possibly doing different TV show reviews or movie reviews or just discussions about things that we find fascinating that are not explainable. So if you
Yes.
enjoy that type of stuff, make sure you tune in. Thank you again for Solus and Brandon. This is Beyond Explanation, and this is produced by Escape the Mind Productions.
Thank you, friends.